Hello and welcome to Unlocking Health with Dr. Lexi. And today I have Dan Hegerich here. And Dan has a coaching business. He is a 6-time cancer survivor. And he really, you've created the C.U.R.E. podcast, right? C.U.R.E., the C.U.R.E. podcast.
It's actually Do The C.U.R.E.
Oh, Do The C.U.R.E.
Do The C.U.R.E., yeah.
Do The C.U.R.E. podcast. And you really emphasize the importance of the necessity to reconnect with self-love through nutrition, movement therapies, and being rooted in the 7 elements of healing, which is the earth, water, air, fire, mind, love, and rest. And so I would love to hear more about this in your journey, Dan. So let's hop into it. Welcome.
Thanks. Well, the journey is really long, and I don't know how long we got on this thing, but I've taken people 3 hours into this story journey, and they've all just had emotional roller coaster. So it is my passion to share the story or it's an inspiration because we need more inspiration in the world, as you know. And what does that mean to me? Inspiration means what Wayne Dyer would say is in spirit. We have to get back to living in spirit. Even over 100 years ago, Rudolf Steiner said, in 1918, somewhere around there, he said, it is very difficult to be in spirit.
Mm-hmm.
They're taking it away from us.
Yes.
Okay. And so the material consumerism ideals have really fully rooted in the generations. And so that's all they really know without a few groups of people. So inspiration is really what I'm about. And then if people that are listening and you feel inspired, certainly you can reach out to me, or you can research your own information on what you're inspired by, what I'm sharing today. Go and research and get the information for what you're inspired, and that will create the self-motivation for your transformation. Remember, one of the things I've learned on this whole journey, and this could be the whole podcast session right now, is no matter what in life, change is inevitable.
Right.
You don't have to do a damn thing. It takes no effort to change.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't feel like an effort between me and 57 years ago when I was an infant, but that change occurred without really my effort. But transformation requires a conscious effort. And so if you're in a position, in my case, if I had cancer, I have to learn to be more conscious in my daily activities so I can consciously transform that to something else. So change is inevitable, and it's really out of your control. But transformation isn't. Transformation is in your control.
So do you feel like the consciousness part of it is mindfulness, or is it a deeper level than even mindfulness?
I would say mindfulness is a major component. And with my limited human thinking and experience, I would say consciousness is bigger than I can actually come up with. Right?
Okay.
In other words, it might be an exploration that I'm in, and that's what cancer sparked in my life, was to become more conscious and to learn what does that actually mean. Right? So from that place, I think being mindful is a very major starting point. Let's call it, conscious living 101.
Okay.
Maybe even conscious 101 is I'm responsible for my reality, or at least how I respond to my reality.
Now, I know you and I have talked quite a bit before this podcast about, your health journey and being diagnosed with cancer. And you were, what was it, 25 when you were diagnosed with cancer?
I was 29.
29.
I was turning 29 when I was first diagnosed. So that's 1994. Feels like a whole new planet or something. It's like, right. I don't even remember those days.
So I know, one thing that we discussed was that it shook up your world, but you were able to sit back and kind of realize that you weren't living quite as purposefully. You were just going through the motions of what was expected of you. So how did you start to change your mindset? How did you even realize that was a part of what you needed to do in your transformation?
All right. So I think in this world, we're co-creators of our reality. I could actually say that. So when I went in at 29 to my oncologist, the first oncologist Dr. Lawrence Cloud. I was there. I was nervous. Why am I so sick? The surgeon said it was probably cancerous, and it was growing pretty rapidly. And when I went in there, Dr. Lawrence Cloud was standing up behind his desk, and I walked in, we met eye to eye, and he had his hand out to shake my hand. So standing up, we shook hands, meeting eye to eye, and he asked me a profound question. And he said, Dan, how did you get into the business of cancer? That was the short version. Dan, how did such a young man such as yourself get into the business of cancer? So that was the trigger from outside of me to trigger the inside of me that was the real self.
Okay.
The real self said, how did I get here? I didn't know that at that time, but I did know that there was something else other than the person with cancer that's in that office. There was another entity, aspect, whatever I want to call it, a conscious piece of me, a part of me that said, how did I get into the business of cancer? How did I get here? And my mind quickly went to reviewing my life a little bit at that time. And what I heard initially, super quick, so automatic, if I was living more Christ-like, would I be here? Now, that came maybe from my mom teaching CCD, the Catholic school at home, and I heard it and I was around it, and we went to church on Sundays. And of course, you know, I was an altar boy for a season or whatever. So we were trying to do the good thing. So I just heard that language. And I emphatically said, no way, I wouldn't be here. I didn't know what it meant at the time, but I sort of reflected back and I said, I'm not living my true authentic self. I'm trying to live up to someone else's expectations. I'm playing apathetic or withdrawn or whatever the case may be. But then it went really quickly into all the ways that I was manipulating the world to get what I wanted. Because that's what we're programmed to do. I mean, literally taught to do that. So if I bump my head at 2 years old and I start crying, I get the candy. I get the popsicle to shut up, to heal me.
Right.
And so that meant, wow, I love this sweet stuff. Maybe I'm just going to throw a tantrum to get my sweet stuff. So I'm taught to manipulate the world to get what I want. And of course, then it showed the behaviors of how I was drinking excessive. And I mean, pretty hard. Like if I started, I didn't know when to stop. Like I had to get stopped by, the bottle had to stop me. Like personality wouldn't stop me.
Right.
Very limited. So, 24 hours later, here you are. So it wasn't something I did regularly. I should take it back. I smoked a lot of pot when I was a teenager to deal with emotions, right? To deal with my parents, my dad leaving our household. And that was traumatic because it came as a sudden burst. It wasn't talked about. It wasn't shared. It was an explosion. Like it just happened as a shock, right? So then at the end of that particular eternal moment, which is what it felt like, that I was in my judgment day of myself, judging and seeing myself, how I was behaving in the world to myself and others, I was living an ignorant, arrogant lifestyle. And that's where all our problems come from. And I will hold myself to that till the day I die. Everything stems from our ignorance and our arrogance. I didn't know at the time the things that I was doing was harming someone else, whether it was psychologically harmful or disrespectful. And I wasn't very honoring this life, this body temple as life. God created this as an instrument for us to tune up, keep it tuned up so we can tune in and play music.
Right.
But if you don't think of yourself as the instrument of God, because in spirit, we're not living that way, we're going to just abuse the instrument that we were given and we're going to blame the whole world for it. That was me. I was definitely the victim, a victim of many circumstances. I was definitely a so-called persecutor where I would just belittle other people to make me feel larger. And I would try to shame other people or pull them down from their success. Very competitive in that way instead of creative or curious, right? Curious. How did you get there? How did you get so good? I'm so glad that you made it. I'd love to make it in my life. How can I help myself?
Right.
That kind of thing. I was not in that. I was in the victim stance. I was in the competitive plane. You know, it would be like in our business as coaches, it would be like, oh, there's not enough people to go around, so I better hold on to the ones that I can, and I got to discredit someone else's character or their skills so that I could look better in the eyes of the public and get more clients. Bad news. That's not the way the world works when you're in spirit. There's abundance for everybody. So that was the starting point where that eternal moment, he finally said, Dan, with a little bit of pain and suffering, you will grow stronger. Now that's an interesting statement. And the way I spun that was, if I enter the pain, entering the pain is a lot less painful than resisting it.
It is.
And so what we do is with all our medications is we're resisting the pain outside of certain things. There's definitely some places for it, but outside of almost all of them. For example, I had a tumor in my spine, and I don't think people realize what it feels like when a tumor is growing out of a spinal bone into a major portion of the spine where the nerves are, into a muscle. And so I refused to take medication because I knew I had to enter that pain consciously. I had to really surrender to listening to what's the damn message. Right. So
that's pretty deep for a 29-year-old who still often, you know, like you said, is living an arrogant lifestyle, right? So to become so introspective at that age, did you really change overnight, or was it a gradual awakening for you?
Well, I had the cancer relapse 5 times, so I would say it was gradual.
Well, you know, it could be different.
And then 20 years even after that to still grow up, right? So, and I'm still growing up. I considered myself in the moment. I'll get back to it as we go along. I'll let the listeners hang in there. Just hang in there with me, gang, because I got some things coming up my sleeve to share with you that I think will be enlightening. So then I had to go home, and I didn't even feel comfortable telling my parents. Like, I didn't have that kind of a relationship, because why? They would belittle me, shame me, invalidate me.
Right.
The list goes on. It would be toxic. It would have been toxic in that moment. And so the only people I could really trust to tell wasn't even my wife. I didn't feel that overly comfortable. Really, it was my in-laws, her parents.
Wow.
You know, I finally did tell my wife, but it was more like she was the type of person that was more apathetic, and her shock, whatever her shock was, I don't know. We didn't share it. We were too young. Our young love was really not mature enough to handle this kind of a shock. So anyway, I felt like it was kind of like, okay, I'm going to have to figure this out kind of thing. And I used a lot of my conscious effort and intellect rather than the feeling centers and the intuition and instincts. Maybe it was something happening unconsciously. So I studied it, and it was like, okay, the type of cancer I had was super aggressive. You got about 5 years to live, max, even if they intervene with it, right? And so I was like, okay, that's pretty good. I just closed the books on all that. And then I just went along with their particular protocol, which was a certain chemotherapy regimen that was basically your standard, you know, generic, anyone with that particular makeup in terms of their pathology, this is where you go. And you got a 50-50 chance of the tumor shrinking and all this stuff. So, of course, I said, all right, I need to use this to buy me the time to answer the question.
Fair.
If I could answer the question, then I can save my soul. And that was the first priority. Remember, in spirit, so I could live more in accordance with my true nature. Right? Live to my true authentic nature. So I had to save my soul from this. And so that's the initial starting point of anyone's miracle.
Mhm. Mhm.
Hands down, end of conversation. So why not start living that way now
Right.
before you get the diagnosis? Right.
Amen. Mhm.
And so our life is situated where we're not doing the cure. We're actually doing the disease, dysfunction, and delusion as a culture, as a society. Society, meaning your social structure, the people that you associate with the most, are doing disease, dysfunction, and delusion. And Krishnamurti's always said it's, no measure of well-being to be, well adapted to a sick society.
Yeah. I'm writing down. I think your 3Ds there, your disease, dysfunction, and delusion is exactly what most of us live our lives by on a day-to-day basis.
You could
So
say it's, Thoreau's little, man's silent desperation. What is it? Thoreau something said. I know some of the listeners know this, right?
they can
Many,
chime
many
in.
men,
I
many
don't
men,
remember
many men
Thoreau.
suffer. Yeah, many men suffer in silent desperation or live a life of silent desperation. It's the same thing. We're stuck in that disease, dysfunction, and delusion. But once you wake up to that, society at whole doesn't hold a container for you to actually really go and heal.
Right.
Just try getting rid of your coffee habit. There's a coffee shop everywhere to remind you of your habit. So it's really difficult. So that started the journey into the medical model, right? So I did my 8 months with this CHOP protocol, and the tumors did go away. And the cocky, competitive Dan was like, "Okay, I did it. I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
Back to the tequila." you know,
Okay.
Even though I started to make some sense of certain things at the soul level, at the actual physical biochemical level, I was still trying to figure things out. I wasn't even figuring them out. I was still cocky and arrogant. I didn't shake that off in the first round. So no, it definitely was going to take a lot more to get through my thick egoic shell and the wounds that I've used to armor myself, right? To put my armor up. So it wasn't too long, probably 4 months, that I started to get the symptoms back. And that's when they had to do a bone marrow transplant. That was the only option now for what they said, potential cure, or at least get you a year or two kind of thing. And then that's when my nurse told me that the markers, the actual markers that they saw, they didn't really tell me, but it was about a 12-month diagnosis. But they
And a
didn't
lot
tell
of
me that.
people would feel very defeated, even with the first diagnosis, but let alone a second one. I know, a lot of my clients that I talk to, when they have a relapse of cancer, they're just like, I'm done, and throw their hands in. You are a testament that regardless, 6 times you're still here, that it can be overcome no matter what.
Well, once again, it comes back to the soul and being able to hear the soul and take a risk of the soul. Instead of gambling, I like to call it a risk of the soul rather than gambling with the medical model.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Big difference, right?
Yeah.
So a risk of the soul means that you're entering into anything's possible.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you're in God, you're God, and as long as you have a faith in something beyond this circus that we're in. Okay. And
go ahead.
And so the other part of that equation, to keep it humble, obviously there's no guarantee. But a lot of people are living their lives as though I can't do it because there's no guarantee. So I'm just going to do the medicine because there's no guarantee that if I go that route. Well, look at medicines, there's no guarantee either.
Right.
Yeah. So where's your faith?
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, we just talked about it a little bit, that our faith has been put into the material plane, not into the spiritual plane.
Right.
So it's all about in spirit. It's all about getting back to the sacredness of our lives in this body temple.
So how does one go about, finding and releasing that vulnerability that they've suppressed? Because I agree wholeheartedly that a lot of manifestations of diseases, including cancer, are repressed emotions. And the more we repress them and bury them down, when we think we've dealt with them, it's just manifesting at a deeper level within the body. So you have to become vulnerable, right, with yourself, in so many ways. But how does one go about releasing that, or peeling back those onion layers?
Well, I think I'd be the multimillionaire if I had a direct answer, right? That worked every time, right? And it's not that simple, right? So at least I don't think it's that simple, or it's simple, but the application of it is complex, right? The simplicity of it might be the complex part. Again, you got to become aware. You got to become aware of that vulnerability first, right?
Do you think it's harder for males to, because of the societal constraints or expectations of men and being
I don't know. I think men are just as passionate as women, right? And it's just applying that passion instead of to, fist pumping with your athletic buddy, is doing it using that passion in a different way.
Okay.
So the paradox, of course, we live in a paradoxical realm. There's paradoxical thinking. And so the paradox here is I used my competitive nature in the beginning to fight it, to battle it, to outsmart it, to outwit it, to understand the enemy, to understand the opponent rather than the enemy, right?
Right.
And dodge and weave, outfox it, kind of thing. And so I had to go through the bone marrow transplant process. And so here's one of the miracles that showed up. So I started the journal very lightly in a daily planner. So that was helpful to start to get in touch with what's happening, what's the experience. And at one point I had tumors growing. They were pretty aggressive. There was one right in the sternum, and it started to grow into the breast here area. And so they were starting the bone marrow transplant with one drug that I had to do for 12 hours overnight in the hospital, which was only to stimulate white blood cell production, because they were going to harvest my bone marrow from my body. And so they needed to have the white blood count high enough and stuff like that, right? And then they're going to inject this bone marrow and stuff back into my system. So I don't know what they were doing, but it was a drug that was only designed to stimulate the white blood cells. And then my aunt gave me this medallion, a St. John medallion, because she saw her on a TV. She said, "Oh, St. John, yeah, everybody touched his clothes, St. John Newman, and they had miracles happen." Or they would hear him talk and they'd have miracles. He was the miracle guy or something. So she was like, "Oh, what the hell? Let me get him this little thing." And so she took it. And I guess this is where the part was. It's like, okay, it's in spirit. Like it's something towards that. It's religious, but it's still in the spirit of miracles, right? And so I took it upon it and I brought it into the hospital that night. And I put it by my bedside on the hospital nightstand. And then I was getting all hooked up and I was ready to fall asleep late at night. And I said my cocky prayer. And I was like, "Dude, this is Dan. My ego's very hard. You're going to have to hit me with an obvious sign, like obvious, that you're with me. If it's going to be about God, you have to make it obvious. Like I have to trip over you." So it wasn't like having to read the rosary. It was a real sincere, true authentic communication, call out, whatever you want to call it, Morse code, to just let me know that you're with me. And so that night, I don't know what time it was, but the nurses come in every hour to check my vitals and all the chemo and whatever they were doing. Sure enough, at one point, I heard a knock and someone comes in, a little silhouette. "Is this George Daniel Hegerich?" Yeah, who is it? They come in, looking down on me. It was the hospital friar or pastor.
Okay.
Maybe 3 o'clock in the morning. It's like, "Yes, hi Daniel. This is Father John." I'm like, "Father John, okay, nice to meet you. Why are you here?" "I just want to make sure you're okay and that you're doing fine." And it's starting to bring up tears. It was goosebumps all over the place. He left, And I woke up, like, you know how you get shocked out of bed?
Mm-hmm.
So I got shocked out of bed saying, was there a Father John, or was I dreaming? Like, or drug induced or tripping or something. So I called the nurses in. I said, is there such thing as a Father John? And they said, yeah, he's the pastor. So I said, get him up here. I just want to let him know that that seems like a prayer answered from St. John Newman and Father John. And then my medallion that I put on the side of the bed was no longer there. It was on my bed.
Oh.
It was underneath me, and all the tumors were gone.
What do I even say to that?
And they got really nervous because they thought I'd get toxicity from the decomposing of this mass that I had in my chest and sternum. Now, they didn't do a CAT scan to confirm how deeply it affected it, but they were like, holy shit, that's pretty cool that happened so quickly.
Wow.
Right. So I was shocked that I said, all right, okay. So chalk that up to like, okay, I somewhat trust this. No, I'm going to challenge you a little bit more, I'm sure, because that's only my first relapse. So I had five more coming, four more coming. You see, so that's what I'm saying. The story goes deep and wide because of all these it's like each phase was a story. Like each diagnosis was a story in and of itself. So I went through that bone marrow transplant, and some people were riding the Pan Mass Challenge on my behalf. They were sending me cards. You know, I got a lot of outpouring. I decided after that day, I said, I'm gonna follow this up. So here's the second part of that equation, that my mother-in-law and her family, my wife's mom, were very Catholic. All right. And they were really strongly Catholic, right? Mm-hmm. So I said, let's put a prayer network letter together and have them all sign it, and have everybody's church sign it. Okay. And I'll put it up in the bone marrow transplant process. And I'll have all their signatures there that they're here with me in prayer. And it was a physical thing, not something internet driven. Big difference, folks. I'm sorry to say. I got it. All right. Energy is, there's no limitations, but we're human. So, all right, eat your fake salad and fake lettuce and see if it works. A real salad works better. So I had them all signed up. I had about, 8 documents full with people's signature, their actual signature, right? And little messages and stuff like that in the bone marrow transplant. So that's just something that I decided to toy with. And that's the part of you that was saying I was starting to become the creator of my reality rather than the competitor. Mm-hmm. That's the first sign that I was starting to do things originally, authentically, outside the mainstream box, so to speak, to create my miracle. Right. That was some of the starting point. I'm sure it started before then, but that's when it really started to become into more tangible reality. And I went through the bone marrow transplant. It crushed. It really did. It crushed me. But back to the people that were riding on my behalf of the Pan Mass Challenge, I was so touched by that. I was touched, and I said, well, the hell with it. If I'm healthy this time next year, which was the summer of 95, if I'm healthy, no, I'm riding that ride. I'm going to ride it. That's the competitor. Mm-hmm. I'm going to show people that I can do this. And so that fall, I slipped again back into egoic Dan and arrogant Dan, and started drinking again, celebrating, cocky, not really following a healthy lifestyle per se, or dietary principles, sort of back into the sad American diet with, a little more fruit and vegetable, let's just say. And so I remember getting home, it was in the fall, and the tumors came back 6 to 8 weeks after that bone marrow transplant.
Wow.
Yeah, it was the fastest they ever saw a relapse. And that was disheartening. That really took the sales down. And my wife at the time and I had a very brief, intimate encounter where I was starting to decide I don't want to do anything. I just want to live this out. I want to see what happens. happens. I just don't feel like I have that kind of energy.
Mhm.
I was just not spiritually drained, but I was physically just destroyed, felt destroyed. And it was really an intimate moment where she grabbed me by the shirt, looked me right in the eyes and said, "You got to do it." And the way I received it was this teenage boy that used to watch Rocky movies and Adrian whispering into Rocky's ear, "Hey, win, Rocky, win." And so it was if she used her life force and gave it to me because she knew I didn't have anything. So she emptied herself so I could continue in some way. That's a reflection, not in the moment. And I said, "All right, you got it. I'm going to do it. I just need to make a serious change in my exercise and diet." Now, listen, folks, this is simple, but it's complex to apply it. You got to change the word exercise to nutrition. You got to be nourished. Food, diet, you got to shake that all out. You got to get rid of that. And exercise, you got to say movement, movement and nutrition. It has to come from there, not diet and exercise. I'll go into diet at some other point or another podcast about with people, but diet, people don't understand what diet is. Well, shit, we might as well do it right now because I'm going to lead them on. Look at the holistic picture of diet is everything you put into your eyes, ears, nose, mouth, and on your skin. It's everything you put your body into, the psychological field that you're in,
Right.
the car that you're in, the home that you're in, the room I'm in right now has an effect, positive or negative, plain and simple. Diet is everything at the bigger picture.
Mhm.
It's everything you put into your eyes, ears, nose, and mouth and on your skin, because your skin consumes 60 to 80% of what you put on it. That's how garlic can be put in your feet and your socks overnight, and you can taste it in the morning and have garlic breath. Or essential oils work, or the Nicoderm patch works. Okay, folks? So all those personal care items that you're putting on your skin, you're consuming it.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So enough about that. Now we can expand on it at some point, but you got to get rid of the word diet. You got to be nourished. And so everybody's on a diet, but it doesn't mean it's nourishing. And that's evidence because you have to look in the mirror and see yourself in the mirror naked and tell yourself, am I nourished? You can wake up in the morning and say, do I feel nourished? Okay. And at the coaching level, something's missing in your life and something in your life has to go in order for you to consciously grow.
Mhm. I agree. The wording that we use holds us back or pushes us forward, and it's sort of like an affirmation. If you reframe it, it has a whole different context and meaning. So thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah. And that's now, but of course, back then when you're in the fire, it's more my innate survival mechanisms and intuitive mechanisms working on my behalf. And then there's the grace of God or the unknown that's working on my behalf too. So at that point, a week later, recognizing I needed to change my diet and exercise, nutrition and movement, and my sister Lori gave me my first book out of the blue. Like she intuitively was in a bookstore and said, "Oh, I think my brother Danny will like this book on nutrition." And then I got the book and I said, "Oh, there's another sign. There's another subtle sign. That's where I'm supposed to be going." And so so I was lifting my ignorance to become more aware of what it meant to start living a true, authentic life and how the universe is there to support me in that. And I didn't have a fear of entering that. I had a curiosity. I had the creative mindset in there. So I read that book in about a week. It was The Zone Diet by Barry Sears, the 40-30-30. Made a lot of sense. Get rid of the sugars and see my addictions with sugar. And that's when I started to really start to make some changes. And I started to go, I went to a bunch of local gyms. I started to go to some local gyms saying, "Hey, can you give me a free membership? Because I'm on full-time disability. I'm going through this cancer and I'm going to create something, but I want your support." And one gym said no, right? And I felt shameful, but then I was like, I don't care, whatever. I have nothing to lose now. Like, right? Freedom is nothing left to lose. That's a Janis Joplin. So I went to another gym and the guy said, "You have a lifetime membership. You get all wholesale discount on all supplements that you might need or want. We're here for your support. I was like, the universe will support you if you know what you want to do and get. So after I would go to the hospital, I'd go back to the gym and I'd go and do my workouts. And then I would drive my wife to the train station and I'd go to the store and get fresh food almost every day. And I'd start planning out, how can I nail that 40, 30, 30? And I became manic on it, OCD. I created spreadsheets. And so it was just another expression of the creative force, wanting to do my best at this journey, like to contribute to this journey rather than sit back. Because remember, cancer was not the answer to my chemotherapy was not the answer to my cancer or that question. Dan, how did you get into the business of cancer? Well, let's see. I should have had more chemo when I was growing up. No, doesn't answer. Oh, geez, that time when I drank too much, I should have went to the hospital and got some chemotherapy. No, doesn't work. Oh, when I broke that bone, they probably should have just cleared it with some radiation treatment too, just to make sure cancer didn't stop. No. So none of their services answer the question at all. Plain and simple. So I knew that the chemotherapy was only there to buy me the time to answer that question fully and completely. Problem is in the spring, I got, in that time frame, I was going through the tumors again, and they were aggressive. So I had to go through chemotherapy again. And that one was hard, but it was a fanny pack. I think it was 24 hours a day for 5 days and then 1 day in the hospital. And so when I had the fanny pack on, I would be in the gym and I would have a friend of mine and say, look, I think it was that time. I might be getting my times crossed, but nevertheless, I would have a friend spot me in case the fanny pack burst because it's hazardous waste. People don't realize you have to call hazmat if that chemotherapy spills because it's so toxic. It can burn people. Yeah. So to make light of it, I did the chemotherapy all the way to the spring, May of 1996. And then I was now saying, well, the hell with it. I'm going to stop all my chemotherapy. The protocol's not done, but I'm going to go ride that ride that my friends rode, that 200-mile bike ride for the Pan Mass Challenge. I'm going to train for that and do it. And so I did. I put 1,500 miles on my bike. I stopped all the chemotherapy. The tumors had shown on CAT scans that it was gone, and gallium scans and all the different things. And they were reluctant because I didn't finish the protocol, but I said, I don't care. What do I care? This is my life. And so,
amen.
So I did. I wrote it. And I made it through it. And problem was my cancer came back again that fall. Right. And so here we go again, and et cetera, et cetera. So the story just keeps going in and out of this desire, this burning desire to live my life, and this constant battle with that egoic self and the arrogant self and the vulnerable self that would, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, 4 steps forward, 1 step back. So the success that people think is overnight, you got to look at the micro moments and how it really, really is going. So the cancer came back again, but this time it was in the spine. I had to get radiation. I got a bunch. It was 13 days straight. I had to go first thing in the morning, last thing at night. So I had to drive to Boston 2 hours, an hour and a half one way, get the radiation, come back. And then I had to rest and then go back at night, another hour and a half there, an hour and a half back. So it was my full-time job, getting radiation, burning the skin and all that stuff to try and get rid of this tumor in my spine. They couldn't do anything with some of the tumors that were showing up in the ribs or a little bit in the hip. So, and then the tumor did shrink and it went away, but then it came back because obviously they missed some things. And so it came back again in the spring of 97. So I had to go through another chemotherapy protocol. 97, I stopped again the protocol so I could train again for that bike ride. And then I was on fire. I started to re-educate myself in human anatomy, and I joined the Czech Institute in Vista, California with Paul Czech and his team and his staff. And their methodology for understanding, because I said, the one thing I learned about nutrition, if I could eat food according to how nature would give it to me, I would move in the direction of being more in tune with nature, and nature's going to heal me. If I eat more whole foods, I'm going to become more whole. Kind of made sense. And so that's really the process. And so I was just sort of, and then if I could get my neuromusculoskeletal system more in balance, that's going to make me feel more imbalanced. And so that's what I need to do. So I really started to apply some of my engineering principles to the human body. And I was really starting to take it upon it as a science project, and maybe as an artist sculpturing something. And I had a vision, and I was really following things I really enjoy. I was making, for creative reasons, I was making tapes of when I was a teenager that made me happy. And that actually is so proven that you will return, you will actually youth yourself if you do that. It's insane that the science behind that, if you do that, if you take yourself back to a time when you were carefree, even if it was smoking pot with friends, it was still fun and laughter and carefree, and the music. And I would make cassette decks, and I would go on long walks and listen to that music. And I just started making all that. I started to become creative in this process. Anyway, to make light of it, I had a 2-year remission. So 97 to 99, I didn't have a tumor. And so I was magically on course. And then my wife left the marriage. And so, folks, that was my Dear John letter. So if you know what a Dear John letter is, the guy comes home from war, and the woman he loved, or the woman he professed his love for when he left, he comes back, and now she couldn't wait, so she moved on, and she wrote a Dear John letter. It's kind of like that. I went to the war. I went into the war zone. I had to let go of her needs. I couldn't meet her needs and I couldn't even pay attention to her needs all that much, or, with any level of presence and consciousness, for sure. And I was very selfish in that regard. So for good reason. And at the end of that, it definitely found out that she had lost, we lost connection, and she left the marriage, but that felt like a Dear John letter. That I had done. I battled the battle, and now you didn't trust or have faith in this process. Anyway, I went into manic bipolar disorder. It really triggered a whole mental illness that I was vulnerable to. And of course, I had to go on psychiatric medications, but I didn't want to do medications. And I got all the side effects, and I got suicidal. And so that led me to wanting to take my life. And in that process of wanting to take my life, again, I was fighting the spiritual aspect and this material aspect. Folks, I wasn't really there to take my life. I wanted to end the pain. Right. Nobody wants to end their life. They want to end the pain, because I didn't have any life skills to really, at that time, to really deal with it. Psychological life skills, spiritual skills, healing skills. So I said, all right, well, what can I do? Well, I went to the church, and I said, hey, I never got fully confirmed into the church. At least that's something. That's just something that I know I can do. That is at least better than wallowing in this depression. And it maybe is just at least the ice cream for the depression. And then finally one morning I snapped, and I went to the gun club, and I got a gun, and I was going to take my life that day. And I had the gun at my head, and I went into a conversation about this little boy and this man. And it was like, you're a pussy, you can't do it. And the man's like, oh, I'll show you who can do this. And I had the gun at the back of my head at the medulla oblongata, because that's the place where you can kill you shut down instantly. And I remember the movie Lethal Weapon. And the first one, where Mel Gibson had the golden bullet, and he was putting the gun in his mouth, and he was just suicidal because his wife got killed.
Right.
And I felt the same way, it was like just that same way. And I realized that in that lesson, I asked the question, why am I suffering for her choices? And the reason, that's another question like Dr. Lawrence Cloud gave me, another stoic question. And the answer was, I had placed my happiness into her. And so when that ended and she left, I was left with this unhappiness, which meant I was holding her responsible for both. And no wonder why the relationship had to end. And I was really excited in some way, because now I had to learn how to be happy for who I am.
Right.
So when we talk about the psychology of what cancer might be, it might be a lie that's coming up so you can live more truthfully. It might be that you're faking your happiness, living a life of silent desperation, and the unhappiness, you're putting responsibility on someone else.
You know, sometimes I think we're taught as a society to suppress so much of our own experiences and emotions as kids that we totally lose touch with our own emotions and what makes us happy. We just conform or do whatever we're told to do. And it's a shame, because I think that's the root of a lot of people. They don't even know what makes them happy anymore.
They've
They
lost
have no
touch with what
idea
they really want. Yeah.
what is enjoyment. Yeah.
And I might add to that, that's not only true, but it's also true that they've replaced that happiness with something outside of themselves. Shopping, more shoes, get your nails done, more ice cream, you know, more immediate gratifying pleasures.
Looking outward, live inward.
Yeah. So I think that the strategy that has been taken, that took its place, was again manipulating the world in some way, outside in, to satisfy that and self-medicate. And I was a master at it. So in that gun club, I heard a third voice, a third part of me to say, hey, take a shot at the target. If you guys are going to argue back and forth, take a shot at the target. And so I did. And I focused so intently that that was all that was in my conscious field. And that thing grew and grew and grew. And it just filled the room. And all this stuff, all this chatter about this egoic experience of cancer and the gun club, all that gone. All gone. Just nothing but an experience of consciousness as consciousness.
Wow.
In that moment. And I emptied the bullets all into the target. I looked at the gun and I said, guns don't kill people. Guns don't take lives. It's the suffering of man that kills people or takes lives. And I said, paradoxically, this gun just saved my soul. And all I needed to do was start to identify and learn how to live more in accordance with identifying as that part of me. And that was going to be the hardest thing I'd ever done, because that's 100% my responsibility. And that's the moment I said I was born into as a spiritual baby, but there was nobody around to mother me.
Right.
Because certainly my mom wasn't, even my in-laws, nobody was going to mother me into that being. And so that was when the real journey starts to begin. And I went into the psychiatric ward, and I, on my own accord, because I was still suicidal, even after that experience, it didn't stick. My understanding, my body wasn't strong enough, my nervous system, hormonal system, my whole body wasn't strong enough to hold that experience. And so I went into the psych ward and I said, look, I'm kind of excited to be here in some way, but I'm also miserable. But I need to learn how to love myself back to health and well-being. That's all my answers. That's it. That's the starting point. And they looked at me and they said, that's your mental illness talking. Because anything, when you're under psychiatric care, anything you say is deemed part of your psychosis. And that what you really need is medication and adjustments of your medication. And as you shake your head, if you're listening, Alexi is really rolling her eyes and shaking her head in disgust. And we're trying to use a little bit of, I guess, laughter for our sadness that that's the way the system is. And it's true, that's the way the system is. And I was so angry, and talk about repressing my feelings, holding back. My tumors came back the second day.
Wow.
And so I was, and by law, I'm under their care for 7 days minimum. So talk about a chicken in the chicken in a coop with a fox in there. So at night I cried really hard, and I had a male nurse that was part of my team, and I asked him, I said, look, what do I need to do to get the hell out of here? Because they don't understand what I need, and they only offer me fear-based stuff, not consciously, I'm sure. They think that's the best in their interest, but it's not going to solve the mystery. He said, just do everything they ask you to do. Like, just fake it till you make it. Like, just do everything. So, you'll see me sewing the next day or singing, and finally they gave me a day pass because I was progressing so well. I wasn't taking the meds. I was spitting them out. They even took my multivitamins and my protein shakes away. They said I couldn't have them. Yeah, you couldn't even take care of yourself. So I started I really saw the joke, the cosmic joke in this whole thing. And I wound up getting out of there and in 7 days. And that's the moment I said I could never go back to modern medicine in their current state of consciousness. And now my consciousness is risen to teach them or share with them and inspire those in there about a different way of how life needs to move. We need to move this way, or our humanity is in jeopardy. It's on a crash course. And so I moved in with my mom, and I started to download information on how am I going to get rid of these tumors, because I'm going to live or die by nature and my true authentic self. And so that's, pretty much what Do The C.U.R.E is about. It's about that. My podcast is about, I started to really make connections to how to heal the body, but on a holistic, much bigger picture, which was those 7 elements, the earth, the water, the air, the fire, mind, love, and rest. And you could add grace in there. It's not necessarily an element, but it's the unknown. It's having the grace for the unknown. And those 2 laws. Anything's possible with God. There are no guarantees in life. Okay, that's the grace that we have to live by. So in applying the philosophy to live by, that summer, I got rid of the tumors in 5 months. And I haven't had them for 22 years since. Right?
It's amazing.
And so if I summarize it for your listeners, health is the foundation of life. Love is the purpose for living. Everything else is a distraction to those 2 things. Everything else in our life, for the most part, is a distraction from those 2 things. So that's why we do disease, dysfunction, and delusion. So we don't get healthy and loving.
So on that loving comment, do you feel like what people associate love with is incorrect? It's love, desire of the external versus love of the internal and spiritual, and love of the self?
The Buddha would say it's the wheel of suffering. Follow pleasure, avoid pain. And so anything that brings you pleasure is love. Anything that helps you get out of your pain is love. Right? And so there's a different form of love where that wheel of suffering doesn't exist anymore. Doesn't mean you don't experience pain. It's just different.
Right.
Doesn't mean you don't experience struggle or whatever. It's just different. So I think people have to understand that you have to come up with your own definition of love, because society is already programmed into one. And usually it's love of polarity.
Yes. Okay.
Or polarization or drama or excitement or a lot of that, right?
Of an emotional charge, basically. I mean,
just being charged. Yeah. And overly excited, or you don't love me because you just made me sad, or you didn't do this for me, that kind of stuff. And what I like to
conditional.
It is conditional. And there is, let's face it, there is conditions in this plane of living. If I have a client and we agree to a payment structure, that's a condition. So it's not love totally, absolute, unconditionally, right? So we do have conditions of constraints in this reality, how we live. So I think it gets a little stickier. So we have to come up with the love definition that really helps us, right? And I define it as love is the purpose for living. And the way I can tell that I'm living that is, am I needy for love and therefore manipulating the outside world to love me because I need to be loved? Or am I being the love in the world that I am? So being the love in the world is really the start, is where we start to migrate into what I would say maturing our love. And we're rising up out of that teenage lustful love that you're talking about, where it's sexually driven,
Right.
rather than avoiding the intimate part of really what it is. So we can become sensual in our relationships and sensual with our environments. And we know that wherever I am, I can blossom wherever I am to more or less a degree. So that's being the love. And it's just, I mean, it's echoing Gandhi, be the change you want to see in the world. Just learn to be love. Love is the purpose for living. So learn to be the love in the world. So you know what's right. You know it's right. So just do what's right. And it feels better. And the more that becomes an automatic habit, then the truth will set you free. But you're going to be angry along the way because of all the lies that have been taught to us.
Right.
And all those lies were built a truth. And how do you question a truth if it was built on it's built on a lie? That's the painful part of the truth, is that, oh shit, there's so many lies now. I mean, even in a sense of like my wife lying about this affair she was having, when I found out, the truth hurt. I was angry. It hurt because I still didn't have enough life skill or maturity or evolution or life experience, et cetera, to really understand that I was needy for love at that time. And that means I was still 2 years old, 5 years old emotionally. Because their dependency needs to be met. They need to know that. I got it. But not at 30 years old or 40 years old, or some people their whole life.
Now, one thing that kind of brings up to me is a question that some people may have, as far as they know people that may be more egocentric, more driven by external things. How come they don't get cancer or certain illnesses, and yet others do, that may be a lot more in tune with their spiritual self and full of love? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that comes to the grace of the unknown. You have to offer it up to the unknown. And secondly, we don't know what's going on inside them. We don't know how their unconscious reality is playing out. And secondly, I know people that had cancer, supposedly died from cancer, but they were empowered by it.
Right.
In other words, cancer did not take root in their spirit. Right? It's different than if you're fighting it and being a victim of it. So it's not about getting rid of the tumors. It starts in spirit. It's not about the physical reality of what's going on. I get it. It's the hardest thing to understand. You work both ends. I worked both ends. I changed my diet and my exercise, but I had to start tuning in. But I had to build the instrument too.
Right.
So I could actually hear the voice clearer and stop playing music better. Because if you have an instrument that's out of tune, nobody's going to want to hear you play music. You sound like shit. So, okay, you smell like shit. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? So
that's a very good analogy.
Tune up your instrument and then start learning how to play with your instrument. So you can play music. And then if you tune in, you're not just playing happy birthday on your instrument. You're going to try to get in touch with what your music is that you want to play in this lifetime, which could be anything. We don't know what it's going to be. So I think the problem is that people look at that person and they, again, are they're doing what's the part of the number one suffering is comparing your life to the life of someone else.
Right.
Again, it's a victim stance. How come they didn't get it? Doesn't matter.
We all have our own lessons to learn and things to
If you're creative, if you're competitive, you're going to try and belittle that person so you can feel better about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, all that money doesn't mean anything to me. That, whatever your internal voice is or dialogue is. If you could reach out and see someone that's cancer-free, health-free, and you can say, hey, wait, I got cancer. What are you doing in your life? What are you doing? How are you living that you can live so stressful and happy and still abundant and joyful and da-da-da-da? But then you got to look at the whole picture. How's his or her relationships? Oh, they've been married 3 times. Oh, the kids don't like them. Oh, there's a lot of animosity amongst your relationships and friends, except for the people you buy. So you're going to be blindsided by it because we've been taught to see people as successful by the car they drive, the clothes they wear, the hairstyle, their pop culture. Okay. And it took me 16 years to build some things inside of my body, enzymes, whatever, repair, where people started to say, oh, you don't look like you're dying, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
That was like not too long ago. And now people, they don't even dare ask what I'm doing because they know it's going to threaten their addictions. It's going to threaten their arrogance. They already know. Many, especially in your 50s, And I'm not going to hold you in the light that you don't know. I'm going to hold you in the light that you do know.
Mm-hmm.
And we just have to work through that ignorance by living more with integrity to your body, mind, to health is the foundation to life and love is the purpose for living. That's an easy principle philosophy to follow. Now, how you navigate it, how you artistically apply that into your life, that's your game. Mm-hmm. Game on.
I feel like whatever someone is suppressing, whatever emotions in their diet and their lifestyle, it really tends to come to a head in midlife. I think that's why we have these midlife crises, is things want to bubble up. They want to be dealt with. And the more we try and repress them, the more we're looking again for those external things. So the fancy cars and the new marriages and this and that, it's because we're still not ready to deal with what's going on inside, but it needs to be dealt with. So
it has to be dealt with. In fact, it is the push from spirit so that you can live abundantly, joyful, and free and die with consciousness, not regret. That's the push. It's another birthing. It's like contractions of a part of you that is incubating within. And those contractions are looking to birth the real you.
Yeah.
So if you can lift your ignorance and acknowledge it in that light, now you can lift your arrogance and say, all right, I'm 50, but I don't know how to do it. I've never done it. Great. Be curious, be creative. Don't be competitive or victimized.
Right.
That's the vulnerability of a lot of men at 50. Because men are subject, especially in our world, more so now, to be great providers. And so if that starts to derail that image in any way, I think they'd rather kill themselves slowly or fast.
I agree.
That's the painful that's the painfulness of this, like you said, the unresolved psyche. Or unintegrated psyche is a better, instead of resolving it, I don't even know if we resolve it, but we can integrate it. We can hug it. We can live with it, the scars and whatever, and we know if we've integrated it enough, we don't get triggered by it. As we see it in someone else, we're not triggered. And therefore our self-critic doesn't come out and judge the other person. But if I'm critical and and belittling and all those other victimized stances or persecutor stances, that's a sign that it's unresolved in that moment. Yeah.
Dan, this was fantastic. I do want to have you back on where we can delve more into your elements and how you integrate the elements. Maybe even what you'll do with, I know you have a lot of great nutrition information, nourishment information that you have. And I'm going to include your website down here. If anyone wants to work with you to kind of uncover what may be going on, any way that they can reach you?
Yeah, the best way is to email me at danhegerich.com at yahoo.com.
Okay.
So Dan Hegerich, Hegerich at yahoo.com. That's the best form of communicating with me at this time. You could also check out the website, of course, danhegerich.com. And you can hear more of this on Do The C.U.R.E, C.U.R.E, because people are listening to our conversation and they might not like the word cure. So it's an acronym. Just being creative to play the game, because they're playing their game. We got to play our game, and we got to know the opponent, and we got to have our playbook. So
I try and come up with my own acronyms. I've not been good at it.
We got to have secret code. So thank you so much, Alexi. This was a real delight, and I'm really happy I was able to share something. And I hope all your listeners got something, at least one golden nugget that they could take forward to be inspired, get the information that they need so they can live a self-motivating life towards, doing the cure, which is love is the purpose for living at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
You're so inspirational. I'm so glad that we've connected over the last few months. You've really made my life better. So thanks, Dan.
Absolutely.